Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to South Africa House. Tonight is an evening we celebrate the work of the Commonwealth Countries League, with all their efforts in advancing and promoting women empowerment, girls' education, and the promotion of blindness. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sisanda Tutulalisa, and I'm the first secretary here at the High Commission. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, Thembi Tambo. Thank you.
I should welcome firstly the Right Honourable Lord Howell of Guildford and Madame Lady Howell, and also Dr. Chris Nonnis, who's also going to be our keynote speaker here this evening. I'd like to also, where are you? Oh, there you are. I'd also like to welcome Mrs. Louisa Service, who is the patron of the Commonwealth Countries Leagues, and of course Mrs. Nalini Paranjivatan, who is the president of the Commonwealth Countries Leagues. For the rest, I say welcome distinguished guests and welcome ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to preface my observations by expressing my sincere thanks to the Commonwealth Countries League for this creditable initiative, and for especially holding it here at South Africa House. This demonstrates that the League's interest in the great cause for the empowerment of women and girls, and for the awareness on the initiative on the prevention of blindness within the Commonwealth countries. It's no coincidence that the Commonwealth Countries League event is presented in the same month as the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which is scheduled to take place in the next 2 weeks. This is where the League enjoys its observer status. The Commonwealth Countries League is one of the oldest Commonwealth organisations which advances and promotes the education of girls and women, and links together women's organisations throughout the Commonwealth. In particular, the League raises funds for its associated charity, the Commonwealth Countries League Education Fund, which helps girls to complete their school education in cases where this might not otherwise be possible, and we commend you for this noble cause. South Africa recognises women as architects of society. In South Africa, women constitute a large proportion of the economically challenged, particularly in rural areas. The National Development Plan, written by our current President Ramaphosa, acknowledges this by taking gender into account by proposing a range of measures to advance women's equality. The empowerment of women and girls with more choices and freedoms, particularly on education, is crucial to achieving a better future for all. We believe that women's economic empowerment is a prerequisite for sustainable development and pro-poor growth. Equally, we commend the League for their introduction on the prevention of blindness. The burden of blindness far outweighs the cost of prevention. Therefore, the opportunity to prevent blindness is a sound route to follow, and one which, as a High Commission, we would be very, very happy to support. South Africa's commitment and continued national effort to promote the equal and active participation of all persons with disabilities, including the prevention of blindness, is essential in all key sectors of society. And therefore, we support the objectives of the League in addressing the challenge to prevent blindness and preserving sight through wise investment through the Commonwealth. This gathering affords the High Commission the opportunity to support the work of progressive formations such as the Commonwealth Countries League in order to enhance programs directed to women empowerment, education of girls, and the prevention of blindness. I wish to thank you and applaud everyone who is involved in this wonderful initiative. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
I now would request our President, Nalini, from the Commonwealth Countries League, to please come up and introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Our guests of honor, my Lord and Lady Howell, Ambassador Dr. Chris Nonnis, our patron Louisa Service, Executive Committee of the CCF, Trustees of the CCF, members and friends. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guests of honor, Lord Howell and Dr. Chris Norris, for our function tonight. We are honored of your presence this evening and thank you for accepting our invitation. I would like to invite Lord Howell first to speak and then Chris to follow.
Madam President and High Commissioner and Excellencies, thank you, Madam President, for that very full exposition. It sounded a bit disconnected, I thought, when I listened to it. And indeed, when I was in Australia the other day, someone was kind enough to make a very full introduction. And they said it was clear that I had some difficulty holding down a job. Well, you can judge for yourself. High Commissioner, say straight away what an enormous pleasure it is to be here in South Africa House, what an enormous pleasure it is to meet you, and I'm absolutely delighted at the chance we're going to have to work very closely together in the future. This is, I think we're making history at this moment. I think we're making history here in Britain. I think we're making history in South Africa and in many other countries as well. But in Britain, I see history unfolding in a fascinating way, and I want first of all to speak about that and the story of my own country, HMG, and Britain's changing role and attitude in relation to the Commonwealth, and then I want to talk about the Commonwealth itself and how it fits into the future, which it most certainly does. First of all, Britain and the Commonwealth. I have to tell you, quite frankly, it's been rather an uphill road. Over the last 20 years or so, here in Northwest Europe, the British have been much preoccupied with their relationship with the European Union. You remember in 1972, the British didn't quite say goodbye to the Commonwealth family, but certainly put Europe at the top of the priorities. And several Commonwealth countries felt that they had been slightly downgraded of friendship. This was because at the time we were told that the developed world of Europe and the Atlantic was the future, and that the whole of the rest of the world, as it was rudely called, in fact the giant areas of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the great island states of the Caribbean and South Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on, and the South Pacific were important and respected, but not the future. That was the view 40 years ago. The wheel turns. I said 20 years ago, just be careful, Britain, don't forget your friends too much. Think of their interests and your interests, because one day, when you need, when things won't necessarily be perfect for you just here in Europe, although Europe is very lively and important and so on, and you will be knocking at the door of friends, the great Commonwealth, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, great importance, wishing to establish new relations with them. Well, this argument went on for many years. Then there's a changed world out there. The growth of the planet economically visibly to the Asian, African and developing world, and the so-called advanced countries advanced, and the whole shift was taking place in the economic, and following the economic gravity, the political gravity of the world. We weren't really listened to, not here in London, for a time. Today, we are being listened to. Today, it is a turning point, I see, particularly for my country, in realizing that something very big has happened in this planet which changes the balance and the interests. We are now moving from that sort of 20th century world of superpowers, of America this and China that and so on, into a world of networks. And I'm going to come to that rather more in a moment. But this changes things. This means that my own country, we're medium-sized in the world in terms of population, but we're rich. We've got agility here, we've got history here, we've got technology here. We have to be very agile and nimble and making sure that we understand how to succeed in the great new markets of the world. And the new markets are very much overlapping with many areas, not all areas, of the Commonwealth. So that is the major change of mood. Now, what has that produced? It has produced at this moment a very, very exhilarating and very welcome commitment by Britain as the host and for the next 2 years the chair of the Commonwealth. You may say, how did that come about? Frankly, it was rather a historical fluke. Originally, the 2015 CHOGM, Heads of Government meeting, was planned to be in Mauritius. Unfortunately, they couldn't manage it at the last moment, and after a brief exchange, Joseph Muscat, the Prime Minister of Malta, agreed that it should be in Malta. Then at Malta, there was a new discussion. Next, who would be president next, and who's going to offer the site of the next head of government. And the plan was for Vanuatu to have the next government meeting. But sadly and very tragically, a couple of years ago, a hideous hurricane or typhoon or anyway storm really almost destroyed that island. It's a beautiful place. I've been there and had much hospitality and been welcomed, but it couldn't manage Commonwealth Commons. So at that point, the British Prime Minister, urged on by a number of us, I have to say, said, let it be in London. Now, all this, as you can remember, was long before anyone had heard of Brexit, which no one expected to happen anyway, frankly, but it did. So it wasn't anything to do with saying alternatives to Europe, and that's quite a wrong way of looking at it anyway, because the Commonwealth isn't an alternative to Europe, it's a completely different structure altogether, and in many ways complementary. So we found ourselves at the time of Brexit, rather to our surprise as a nation, negotiating ourselves separate from the great European Union treaties. Some say moving towards liberty, others said it wasn't such a good idea. The nations divided on that, but anyway, it happened. It happened. And immediately, our policy planners and experts began to turn around and say, well, wait a minute, we've now got to think of new markets. Europe's there still, and we'll have access to Europe. It may not be on such good terms. There may be difficulties. We have got to put our skids on. We have got to get our energy up, and we have got to develop a competitive position and good investment relations and good financial relations and all the things that go with that, good elements of trust and the surrounding education and friendship and cooperation on the creative industries and the whole envelope of attitudes. We have got to develop that with our Commonwealth friends, who we haven't been in some cases as friendly with as we should have been. So for reasons that you can say are good reasons or bad reasons, it suddenly becomes vitally important for my country to find gigantic new consumer markets, to find new sources of investment from the great saving nations of the great nations of savers who are in the Commonwealth, and generally to cooperate much more closely than ever before. And that is the spirit underlying the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that is now about to take place in London. And it's part for Britain of our reorientation for the 21st century, away from reliance just on our American cousins and the superpower, into a world of networks where every nation in all networks we can find, of which the Commonwealth is much the biggest and much the most important, are very vital to us. And that is what we are now working on. What does that mean in practice? It means that the organisation here in London of British relations with the Commonwealth has had a big uplift. A year ago, 18 months ago, the Commonwealth was looked after from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office by a unit of 6 people. It was one of the international institutions that Britain had to sort of keep up with, and it was valued, and everyone knew that it had very strong royal support and so on, but it was just one of the other institutions. But then came the change. Immediately, it was taken up to the Cabinet Office level, which means, in the jargon of Whitehall, that it was right across Whitehall, and no longer just a Foreign Office issue, and guided by a new Commonwealth Summit unit of immense power with a very senior official, former ambassador actually to Tokyo, Tim Hitchens, reporting direct to the Prime Minister, with a staff this time, wait for it, not of 6, not of 60, but of 80 high civil servants, all working to establish and rejoin, I use the word rejoin the Commonwealth for Britain. That is a statistical and administrative demonstration of what is happening. It's only the tip of the iceberg because, of course, on top of that, you were coming up to a Commonwealth summit with a difference. Most people are used to summits being photo ops, big black Mercedes going to and fro, probably all the big shots speeding around a green baize table, communiques and all the rest. That is old-fashioned 20th century summits. Today, summits have to embrace the people. Today, summits have to recognize that half the world is on the iPad and the mobile telephone, more than half the world is on the World Wide Web. And I'm not saying necessarily we all want to be on Facebook and Instagram and all these other things I don't really understand, but we are all connected up, and public opinion wants its say, and people want to come into and connect with opinion and not just be told that something from on high has been decided over their heads. This is a new world. This is a crowd-funded world, if you like. And so this summit here in London is going to be stretch out to link with a vast range of professions and interests, and educationists and universities and business and marketing, and with the regions and cities all over this country, and certainly I think over many other countries of the Commonwealth as well. It is going to be, just as the Commonwealth is a people's Commonwealth, it's going to be a people's summit. Now, nothing like that has ever happened before. It requires vast organisation and a lot of expenditure, and it will be, I think, an amazing event which will open the eyes of many people who are still looking back into the 20th century, saying, oh, goodness, how do we get on with Europe? What do we do with America? What about China and so on? Suddenly realizing that we have this new situation. So that is what is happening. I find this extremely rewarding and exhilarating after 20 or 22 years of some disappointment. I go back 22 years because in 96, that was 22 years, I chaired a House of Commons parliamentary committee which recommended to the British government that we should re-establish our links with the great Commonwealth network, both to be champions of the smaller states and to be the allies of the bigger states, and that this was part of the pattern of the future. No one took any notice. No one took any notice at all. And it is now a completely changed situation, and one that's immensely rewarding. So that's what is happening. Now let me just move to the Commonwealth itself. Wide misunderstanding and historical blinkers still govern many people's views of what the Commonwealth is about. There are even some officials, I'm sorry to say, in high places in Britain who are reported to have said, oh, what are they talking about the Commonwealth? It's just silly old people trying to revive the British Empire, and that's all finished anyway. There are such people around. But gradually, I think the scales are falling from eyes, and people are realizing 4 important new things about today's Commonwealth. First of all, it's enormous, as you know. It's a third of the entire human race, 2.4 billion. Secondly, 60% of it is under 30. So when Her Majesty the Queen says it's a platform for the future, she really is literally correct. It is the future. It is young people in vast numbers. Thirdly, obviously, it's more 60% under 30. It's half and half women and men throughout the Commonwealth. So it's a vast area demanding far more commitment to gender equality. So it's, first of all, a network. Secondly, it is largely non-governmental. Now, if you're a government official, this is a very difficult thing to get. Government officials think they should deal with government officials. Governments think they should deal with governments. Bureaucrats think they should deal with bureaucrats. So to be told that one of the biggest and most important networks in the world is mostly non-governmental and in fact spreading over a huge range of professions and interests outside, beyond government, and agencies and groups of every conceivable kind, and as I say, from architects A to zoologists Z, and every letter of the alphabet in between. To be told that is a bit puzzling, because governments feel a bit uneasy about non-governmental things. How do they work? Who's made the laws? Where are the rules? And so on and so forth. So that's a very difficult message to get over. It's a necessary message for the 21st century, because we are dealing in a world where non-governmental linkages and non-governmental connections are far more important than ever before, and far more enabled. Everyone can talk to everyone every day, every hour, and does so. You look at the patterns of the intensity of communication every day, you are talking about millions, billions, trillions of exchanges of view every day. If you put all, I'm told if you piled up one day's exchanges across the world into disks and piled the disks up, they would for one day be 4 times the height of the Eiffel Tower. There's a useless statistic for you that brings home the total change in which we're operating in the 21st century. So first of all, as I say, it is a network. Secondly, it is a people's, it is voluntary. It doesn't actually need, it has the services and support of the Secretariat which it gets. It needs a framework and, like a great painting, it needs a symbolic center and focus, which of course is Her Majesty the Queen, as head of the Commonwealth. That's fine. But it doesn't need a lot of blueprints and planning and everyone at some great secretariat at the top telling it exactly what to do. It wants the support of a secretariat, which it's got, but it doesn't want the push and regulations and standards and harmonization and insistence from some lofty authority that this is what it must do. It is voluntary. I liken it myself more to thinking about a great flower garden, a bed of garden, where many things are growing, some of them quite surprising things that maybe the gardener didn't know were there, but the fantastic growth goes on automatically. You see, networks have, and this is again a difficult 21st century concept, networks have their own agenda. They grow. If you put a network next to a network, it immediately connects up with all the connections of that network. And so the whole thing spreads. And so we have the Commonwealth linking up with all sorts of activities and countries and markets outside the Commonwealth and spreading all the time. And it doesn't need too much government over it. It has rightly got the agreement and support of governments coming together who wish to join. If they don't wish to join, they can go away. If they do wish to join, they can come to the Commonwealth Club. And of course, that is exactly what countries outside the Commonwealth are doing at this moment. They are coming together and saying, oh, this Commonwealth, right, it's not the solution to all our problems, but it looks a good family to be joining. Please can we be interested in it, or at least associated with it, or observers, or linked to it, and so on. Several countries have said they would like to be more involved in the London Commonwealth here. I personally would like to have seen that. I'm not sure it's as been as encouraged as it should have been. So that's the second thing. The third thing, we were on the connectivity, the voluntary nature, the network, and the fourth thing is that all this makes our Commonwealth system today ideally suited to the digital age. Because it is people talking to people, because of the connectivity at every level, because it is based on a vast diversity, the diversity which people used to say made the Commonwealth weak, in fact, in the digital age, makes it strong, the very opposite. And that is what is happening today. So I think I've said enough to you to indicate that we are all making history. We are moving into an entirely new international milieu, the like of which has never been known before. It's got its bad elements, because of course fragmentation of authority and the crowd, as it were, taking over can be a good crowd or a bad crowd. And there are, we've seen in the Middle East, all kinds of groups and tribes and cells and divisions being enormously enabled by having mobile communication and using that to bad effect in tearing down authority. But on the other hand, it can be immensely beneficial pattern of linkages as well, and that is what, in the case of the Commonwealth, because we have common values, a common attitude to our past and our present and future, a common degree of friendship, and that framework that I've described to you of the Queen at the head of it all, because we have all that, our use of the connectivity network is very, very constructive. Just let me end with just a couple of examples amongst many of how these linkages are working. I don't know if anyone's here from the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Anyone here from that? No, never mind. Commonwealth universities link up 530 universities. When I say link up, I don't mean sort of once a month or once a year. Every day. They are conducting a continuous conversation on faculties, on the welfare of students, on how to organize and build new universities, how to expand, how to manage, how to direct, and how to control. That is a staggering fact which puts to the forefront of our lives, and remember all those people under 30, 60% of us, it puts universities at the spearhead of our relations between all the different parts of the Commonwealth. So today's universities are just as much powerful, just as much part of the linkages and the system of the Commonwealth as our governments, in many cases more so. That's one. Then now switch from London to Vancouver. Anyone here from the Commonwealth of Learning? No, I'll tell you about that as well. The Commonwealth of Learning is the greatest distance learning operation in the world, by far. They are connected again every day with 40 million students. 40 million. They are running a virtual university which is bringing another million or so of students in. They are helping to, along with the Association of Commonwealth Universities, which I've mentioned, they're helping to run an enormous range of scholarships and a student exchange, which isn't just in the old pattern scholars coming from Commonwealth to British universities, although we love our universities and we want to see more here. And frankly, I'd like to see the visa arrangement reformed so that we encourage students rather than discourage them. But exchange the other way as well. Within the Commonwealth, there are brilliant new universities arising, and we in Britain are going to have to adjust to the idea that we want to learn from the rest of our friends in the Commonwealth. This isn't just a one-way process. It is a network, and in networks you don't have a hub and spokes like a wheel. You have a network with everybody connected. Quite a different line of thinking. So that's just two examples. There are many more. The Commonwealth Lawyers Association, or where will we be without lawyers? They're everywhere. And we have the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, we have the Commonwealth Local Government Association, have the Royal Commonwealth Society, which I have the honour to be president. We have countless others, which I should mention. We have all sorts of organisations, such as yourselves, which I have the honour of addressing this evening. I think that there are at present about 82 officially accredited organisations according to the one list I saw, but according to another list, there could be as many as 200. Why? Because there are a lot of unofficial bodies as well, realising that the name Commonwealth, which used to somehow belong to the past, now belongs to the future. It is becoming, if you like, the badge you need to wear. So that's what I've got to say to you. That's what I've got to congratulate you on for being part of this turning page of history. And that's what I think we've all got to thank good fortune for seeing this island of Britain being a part of a modern Commonwealth system, which is going to be absolutely essential, going to be, if anything, a haven of understanding in, frankly, a world which is very dangerous and troubled. And we are the lucky ones, we are the fortunate ones. We haven't actually done much to earn it in Britain, but we've inherited this good fortune, and the Commonwealth system is indeed the network of the future. I've called it in a book I just wrote, the mother of all networks, and it is. There's been nothing like it as big as this in history. So there we are, a rather big thought to end, but thank you very much for listening to me about all this.
Great
great, great pleasure and an honour to introduce Dr. Chris Nonis, who is going to give us a ravishing talk, hopefully just as interesting as Lord Howell's. Over to you.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the South African High Commissioner, Excellencies, the President of the CCL, Nalini Paramithana, and members of the CCL, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure to be invited to share a few thoughts with you today. And it's a particular pleasure to be here at the South African High Commission. I remember many, many years ago as a young medical student, a bit of a radical at the time, standing outside in solidarity with several other people in the campaign against apartheid. And I remember having to answer the questions as to why, with many of my medical student friends, I was standing outside in the freezing cold at -2 degrees in support of a man whom I'd never met. But subsequently, I must say that I've always been a fan of Nelson Mandela, and we were so sorry to hear about Winnie Mandela, because I think that many people talk about him as having his greatest thing of having ended apartheid. But I think actually he was even greater than that, because after 27 years in captivity, in prison, he was able to forgive his captors. So I think he was really the personification of equanimity. And he was truly a statesman. He went beyond being just a leader or a president or prime minister. He was actually a true statesman. And that's something I think he'll always be remembered, because he was able to have the humility to subsume his own ego and put his country and his people above himself. And if only there were many other leaders like that. I'd also like to, on this occasion, as Britain very shortly takes the chair in office of the Commonwealth, I think it's so important that we should pay tribute and acknowledge the tremendous, tremendous commitment and passion to the Commonwealth and all things Commonwealth of a particular person, and we should really admire everything she has done way beyond her line of duty, and that is to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I think she's done sterling work, and she's really been the very apotheosis of the Commonwealth. I'd also like to mention, of course, His Royal Highness Prince Charles. I'm particularly privileged to sit on one of his charities, the British Asian Trust. And during my tenure as High Commissioner, it was an enormously challenging task, because we'd, a few years before, come out of a bitter conflict with the terrorists. It was a very challenging time. Lord Howell, I know, and many other people know how challenging it was. But during that time, we, with the support of many of the people, in fact, I can see several people here, many Commonwealth groupies, as I call them, I was one of them, who really supported me during that very difficult time to ensure that the heads of government meeting actually happened in Sri Lanka. And during that time, His Highness Prince Charles and the Duchess came out to Sri Lanka. Their presence was tremendous. It was a tremendous support to our country. And it was wonderful the manner in which they endeared themselves to all Sri Lankans and rose above all these petty disputes that were taking place. And I must take the opportunity, I know it's too many to name, but to thank so many of you who supported me particularly during that time, and I see many of you in the audience today. So thank you very much. It's also a time to really congratulate Nalini Paramithana and all those members of the Commonwealth Countries League for the wonderful work that you all are doing towards the empowerment of women, towards the education of girls, and as a doctor of medicine, towards eradicating and preventing blindness, which I think is an excellent initiative. As Lord Howell said, the Commonwealth is endowed with a very rich heritage and legacy, and As you all know, the modern Commonwealth dates back to the London Declaration of 1949. I'm happy that Sri Lanka was one of the founder member nations of that. Of course, the antecedents of the Commonwealth goes back to the 1870s. But it's always stood up and subscribed to the two twin pillars of democracy and development. And those have been articulated in successive chogams at the Government meeting and declarations such as the Singapore Declaration of 71, the Harare Declaration of 91, the Millbrook Declaration of 95, the Munyuna Statement of Respect and Understanding, something that Amartya Sen worked on closely, and many other declarations during that time. And I believe that the greatest wealth, in fact, and indeed the greatest asset of this rich tapestry, which is the Commonwealth, is actually the diversity of its people. We have a tremendous cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and religious diversity, and also a diversity amongst the countries themselves. I mean, there's such a huge diversity in terms of the scale of the economies, the GDP, the per capita income, and even the population. You have India with a population of over 1 billion, and then several other countries with populations of less than 100,000. So there are, and this leads to tremendous disparities as well. And I think that's the point that that I would like to really make. I was asked to speak a little bit about bridging the Commonwealth divide. In fact, the Commonwealth is always regarded as united and a family, but within that, there are these disparities. I think you alluded to that some people see it as a weakness, but actually what it is I think it makes it's a compelling imperative that because there are so many differences within the member states, that we need to have and always have the sensitivity, the empathy, and the understanding that not all the priorities of all these member states are necessarily aligned. We may not always necessarily reach consensus, and we may not understand each other. But the important thing about the Commonwealth is that we should always respect each other with our differences. Because it's only when we respect, without imposing things on others, because it is only when we respect each other with our differences that we give each other dignity. And it is only when we give each other dignity that we ensure a truly pluralistic, inclusive, egalitarian Commonwealth, which is prepared for the 21st century, which is both contemporary and relevant to all people throughout the Commonwealth family. And I think that's the point that I'd like to make. I think it's important, therefore, that all of us have that graciousness of heart and generosity of spirit to be able, like Mandela, to subsume our own egos, to have that humility and think about the other rather than just the priorities of ourselves or what we see as important. Because even when I served on the Board of Governors and in various Commonwealth institutions, I sometimes came across this perennial debate as to what the important priority was, and there were always very many divergent opinions. But I feel that where the Commonwealth will really achieve its greatest value, as Lord Howell said, is that it is people-centric. And it's important because it reinforces our belief as ordinary people to be able to shape the collective destiny of ourselves and of our countries. And I think the Commonwealth is an effective instrument. In addition to promotion of shared values, it should be and must be an effective instrument for real, genuine socio-economic development of every member state. So the criticality is therefore to be innovative, to be flexible in our approach, and to address imperatives such as free trade, energy security, climate change, the youth, gender equality, and bridging the digital divide. Because today, a third of the Commonwealth, it's 2 billion people, live on less than $1 a day, $1 US a day. And almost 60% of those in the Commonwealth live on less than $2 a day. 270 million people in the Commonwealth don't have access to decent water supply, and 60% of those with HIV/AIDS throughout the world are in the Commonwealth, and 60% lack access to essential drugs and to decent sanitation. Women constitute amongst 70% of those living in poverty within the Commonwealth. And this is worsened by asymmetries in the international trade regime and unsustainable debt repayments. So poverty, I think, in all its dimensions, is a tremendous challenge for the Commonwealth, for all its states. And what it requires is a really sincere commitment and partnership, without which democracy and development will still remain a rhetoric rather than a reality. Trade is the most important driver for growth, for economic growth and development. And economic growth is probably the most powerful instrument for reducing poverty and improving the quality of life in developing countries. And as I remember during one of these debates articulating as the High Commissioner at the Board of Governors meeting, that we need to address common poverty if we are to in turn address common wealth. And since we all share this goal in helping this Commonwealth family, well, let's reduce the trade barriers that exist. Let us liberalize. Let us expand pan-Commonwealth trade. Let's move towards a pan-Commonwealth trading bloc, which could be one of tremendous and mutually beneficial cooperation amongst all Commonwealth countries. As Britain, as Lord Howe said, Britain looks to reposition itself now as a global trading nation, particularly as it looks to leaving the EU in 2019. In the post-Brexit era, Britain needs and will need to have an increased economic and strategic imperative of forging global links and increasing global trade. And I think the Commonwealth provides just that opportunity. As Britain assumes the chair in office, therein lies the most fertile opportunity to bridge the Commonwealth divide. Britain can therefore, as it takes the chair in office, be the catalyst for economic equality and stimulate investment, commerce, create jobs, facilitate quality education, and boost tourism throughout the Commonwealth. Another initiative I think that Britain could take forward is to form a Commonwealth Bank, rather along the lines of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was formed just in 2016. The other is to enhance Commonwealth visa mobility through a multilateral visa agreement between Commonwealth countries. That would be a real demonstration of our sincerity to assist pan-Commonwealth trade, tourism, and cultural exchange. Or else, there can be a real danger post-Brexit that investors will see the EU, the 27 in the EU, as a more attractive option than an isolated UK. And I think we should really look towards how we could have a multilateral visa agreement. After all, if this is one great Commonwealth family of 53 nations, let us then have some kind of ease in terms of movement between the different Commonwealth countries. The other is, how can we harness the Commonwealth network? Lord Howell again spoke about the Commonwealth network to the advantage of the Commonwealth. If you look at China's One Belt, One Road initiative, or Belt and Road initiative of President Xi Jinping, it's a massive trade and infrastructure project that links China throughout the Eurasian axis, physically and financially to dozens of economies across Asia, Europe, Africa, and Oceania, of transport, energy, railroads, and shipping routes. And it's bringing to China enormous business opportunities. And the Belt and Road Initiative of China is vast. It encompasses countries that account for 29% of global GDP. I can't help but admire what China is doing by harnessing its network across the entire Eurasian axis. And to me, it provides ample food for thought as to what the Commonwealth could do similarly, which has a huge network spanning so many continents and a wonderful reservoir of goodwill. Just think what the Commonwealth could do if it had a similar Belt and Road Initiative. Therein lies another opportunity when Britain assumes the chair in office. I think perhaps the greatest opportunity for Commonwealth countries is to bridge some of the Commonwealth divides, is also to embrace new technologies. Again, Lord Howell spoke about that. And I think that embracing new technologies enables a lot of Commonwealth countries, which may be dependent on agriculture or manufacture. It enables them to leapfrog and actually achieve far greater strength internationally. One such opportunity to me is about embracing biotechnology, because a lot of Commonwealth countries have a tremendous biodiversity, a tremendous genetic biodiversity, and therein lies the opportunity for biotechnology, pharmacotherapeutics, genomics, particularly after the characterization of the human genome. I'm interested in it because during my BSc many years ago, I was doing a molecular biology project, and I remember as a young medical student extracting DNA. We were looking at a particular control sequence of the Harvey-Raz oncogene, which is one of the oncogenes responsible for tumors. And I remember extracting that DNA and having at the end of my pipette the very stuff of life. And I couldn't help but marvel at how such simple techniques could make such a profound difference. Now that technique, the polymerase chain reaction, at the time was very new and very newsworthy. Today, the polymerase chain reaction is an ubiquitous tool used by so many labs throughout the world for rapid DNA diagnostics, forensics, and so many other areas. And it just goes to show, and it's now embraced by many Commonwealth countries, developing countries. It just goes to show how, with a relatively low cost, we should embrace new technology. But the importance, if we're doing it with biotech, is that we should ensure that the intellectual property rights are ensured for those particular countries, because that is the wealth for developing countries, their genetic biodiversity. The other, of course, is nanotechnology. Now, nanotechnology is the ability to manipulate molecules and develop smart molecules, particularly for if we're looking at clean energy and the future of cars, going beyond hybrid, and so on and so forth. But I read the other day that even though in the entire sub-Saharan Africa, which has also several nanotechnology institutes, less than 0.4% of all IP in nanotechnology is owned or registered in sub-Saharan Africa, despite the fact that it has so much in nanotechnology. So I think it's very important that we look at the value and the wealth for Commonwealth countries to enable them to rise up and achieve equal parity and equal status. The other, of course, is the ICT revolution, and the mobile internet has made a huge and profound impact in bridging the digital divide. And the key is how we harness digital capital. But in terms of social media, there's a lot in discussion in the news. I had the privilege of meeting Narendra Modi, who, long before he became the Prime Minister of India, when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. And I must say, in a small meeting, I was so struck by his entire focus, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do with this country, but also on his key focus on the value of information and communication technology. And in fact, he was one of he's ascribed with using one of the biggest social media campaigns for his election. That's very interesting. And at the time, I had no doubt that one day he would be the leader of India. And what's very interesting is that on social media, I hear that his following as a political leader, he has over 20 million followers on Facebook. And he's only second to the ex-president of the USA, Barack Obama. And on his Twitter, he only trails behind His Holiness Pope Francis. And he has over 6 million Twitter followers. So there you are. Social media can be a great democratizer. And the other is disruptive technologies. They've also made a paradigm change in business models in many Commonwealth countries. They democratize industries, it empowers ordinary people, and it enables smaller businesses and smaller Commonwealth countries to compete with larger ones. So disruptive technologies not only embrace change, but you also see an acceleration in the rate of that change. And the greatest beneficiaries, I think, of the knowledge economy, of course, are the youth. You know, they're the greatest Commonwealth asset, but yet, sadly, they face the greatest challenges in the 21st century. We've got 1.3 billion young people living in the developing world. 200 million of them live in poverty. 130 million of them are illiterate. 88 million are unemployed. And 10 million are living with HIV/AIDS. So let's develop a comprehensive pan-Commonwealth Commonwealth exchange program and scholarship scheme. Lord Howell did mention about the Association of Commonwealth Universities and so many others. Let us expand that. Let's harness the power of youth. We did many years ago a project called YOCOM, which was to enable dialogue linking the youth of lots of different Commonwealth countries in a youth portal. But in addition to that, let's have a formal program of technology transfer and exchange programs. And let us also encourage Commonwealth student visa mobility. We hear so often how difficult it is for students, even though when they have achieved or have places at universities in some of the wealthier Commonwealth countries, their visas are rejected. Why? I mean, if we are committed to the youth who constitute over 60% of the Commonwealth, then we should be very free in our ability, in our commitment to education, to healthcare, and particularly to literacy. In my country, Sri Lanka, just to digress a little bit, we have probably the best perinatal and maternal morbidity and mortality indicators in the whole of South Asia, in the whole of Asia. And even WHO and many other people have looked at as to how we have such excellent indicators, because we don't spend more than 5% of our GDP on healthcare. One of the reasons that's been alluded to this is the literacy, the very high literacy rate we have in Sri Lanka, and that pregnant women can read the instructions on the bottles. I mean, isn't it tremendous that the literacy rate of rural women can have such a profound impact on the healthcare indicators in terms of perinatal and maternal morbidity and mortality? And that is all the more compelling reason why we should actually ensure that we have formal education and exchange programs pan-Commonwealth. Particularly because it's only at a young age that the mind is most open to inquiry and debate. And it's at a young age that we can challenge conventional wisdom. So before I conclude, I would just like for all of us to remind ourselves. And before I go off the topic of youth, I just wanted to say, I'm sure all of you would like to congratulate a young couple, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and we wish them all the very best in their wedding next month. And I'd just like to finally leave you with just a little thought. My late mother was a great fan of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. You know, she did a lot for the lepers and for the hugely disadvantaged in Calcutta. And a rather cynical journalist, my mother had the Mother Teresa's book at her bedside, and I read it, and a rather cynical journalist once was interviewing Mother Teresa and asked her, well, Mother Teresa, you know, all this wonderful work you're doing, isn't that just a drop in the ocean? To which Mother Teresa replied, yes, my son, but the ocean would be less without my drop. And she went on to say, and my son, what have you done with your drop? So the point I'm trying to make is that all of you here, and I know throughout the times I've voluntarily worked in the Commonwealth, all of you here are here actually because all of you have the goodwill, you have the empathy, you have the sensitivity and understanding. That's why I see so many faces who I recognize. That's why you all are here, because you want to do something for the Commonwealth family. And each of you is probably making a contribution, large or small. And don't ever think that that drop is too little, because every drop you make makes a huge difference to the ocean that is the Commonwealth family. And in that same spirit, I hope that some of you may think that I've done my little job for today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite our patron, Louisa Service, to give the vote of thanks.
What an easy thing to do. Lord Howe, everything you said, I wanted to get up and say, yes, yes, absolutely. And people say to me, I don't know what the Commonwealth means. I say, well, two things. I'm Canadian. If you ever cross the frontier from Canada to States, States to Canada, you know immediately. When you visit any Commonwealth country, you have an affinity, you feel an affinity. It's very odd, and it's very difficult to put your finger on it. So thank you so much, Lord Howe. And you also said something, the wife of the former High Commissioner for Mozambique said a beautiful thing. She said, Mozambique gained their independence from Portugal. Then when we joined the Commonwealth, we felt we joined a family. And I think that is absolutely, you mentioned that yourself, that's absolutely right. Dr. Nonnis, I heard you before, so I knew it was going to be good, and it was. And also, like you, I also have stood outside this, when I was a young woman, outside the High Commission, for a very different reason, never thinking that I would come in and be welcomed here. The CCL, I have to say, I've been a member for 60 years of the CCL, so it's a long, long time. It's a political organisation, initially, also charitable, also cultural, and we all learn from each other. And Nalini has done a wonderful job this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. We now carry you away to a beautiful part of the Commonwealth. We will now have an Indian classical dance performance.